and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we talk about the week's hottest legal topics. Up this week, the Menendez brothers. How hot is that? We're going to go through their backstory, what the procedure is, how we've gotten to this place where we are now reconsidering their sentence, and possibly these men are up for parole after 30 years, 3 decades, even more than that. So where have we come from? Where are we going and why? That's what we're going to discuss today. We're also going to talk about Elon Musk's voting lottery. Is it legal? Who would we represent? Why would we represent them? And what are the logistics of this with legality? The third thing that we're going to talk about today, we have been covering executions and halted executions lately in the news. So we've got one that actually went through. We've got another that was halted. And this week, we're going to talk about the potential execution of a man who was convicted for shaken baby syndrome, for killing a child through shaken baby syndrome. So we're going to talk about that. And then stay tuned to the end if you like a little bit of politics. We are a legal show, but we've got an expert political scientist with us. Chelsea and I both took political science in college. The election is upon us, so we've got to throw a little bit in. What we're going to talk about is political definitions, okay? So we're going to talk about the election itself, some political definitions. We're trying not to be too one-sided or the other. When we state those opinions. You do not have to agree with us. We are not trying to make someone else believe it. But we'll tell you when there are our opinions versus what we think are more neutral. I'm Virginia Tarani. I am the CEO of The Law Unscripted, which hosts this program. The Law Unscripted has this podcast and the Law Unscripted podcast. We also offer law school and bar examination review classes. So first-year law students, if you're out there wondering, oh my gosh, what am I going to do for exams this year? Check out our programs. You can pick and choose your topics. We do the 8 core subjects, including torts and criminal law. And we even have outlines on there and hypotheticals. If you want to see would I actually pass an exam, check out our hypotheticals. We walk them fully through so that you can see would I have gotten the same answers. I am joined today by Chelsea Rogers. She's the other attorney with Tarani Law LLC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. We practice in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, and Chelsea is an amazing attorney to work with, as well as a co-host for this podcast and in The Law Unscripted. Welcome over.
I'm glad to be here. We have a lot to talk about today.
We do. It's a very exciting day. I'm more excited about this one than our last one. Last one I felt was kind of and we've got some kind of nasty comments from the episode. So hopefully this one being more exciting, we'll get better comments. But, we got views, right? I don't know.
Yeah. We have some hot topics this week, and we have some controversial topics this week. I think there are, out of everything that we discuss on this podcast, I think the topics we have today, there are good arguments on either side, and our haters are going to be shocked to hear me say that, because everyone knows that I just say but I feel like there's some good arguments on either side for a lot of what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. I do think it's a very interesting episode for everyone to have a good listen. And we are joined by the amazing Dr. John Weil. He is the Dean of the Honors College with Middle Tennessee State University, and he is our resident political science expert. And this is his favorite time of any year is election time. I think it causes him some ulcers. I think he's generating a few. But with politics, truly this is your favorite time and the most exciting, whatever happens. And he's going to walk us through some of this political portion, some of these definitions. He's also an expert in the Constitution, the amending process, and constitutional law. Welcome, and we're grateful to have your insight today.
Thank you. You might be ashamed of me. I gave a talk earlier this week, and someone asked what the solution was to partisanship. And I said, well, maybe we just should have elections every 20 years.
That's
but
funny.
Anyway.
Well, we had in Maryland, where I am, I did mail-in voting. You can think, anybody listening can think what they want, but that was my choice. And one of the options that we're looking at is some term limits. on certain positions in the area. And I found myself for the first time, I've been practicing law for 19 years. I won't tell you how long it's been since college years. But I found myself actually agreeing with term limits for the first time in a very, very long time. And I was like, okay, and maybe never before. And I was really shocked with which way I voted this year on that particular piece. But you can teach an old dog new tricks. We always do change for good or for bad. You can think what you want of me, but let's do some drinking. So it's happy hour, right? Everybody join us. Dr. Vile's joining the ones with water. We love our designated drivers. I am safe and sound tucked in my home drinking a glass of wine. And Chelsea, it looks like you have one too.
Oh, yeah. Strong pour today because I'm very, very excited for these topics.
These are good topics. Do you remember when we first started the weekly wine? I'm going back to that as we were talking about Casey Anthony.
Oh my God.
Right. I think that might have even been our very first one. And we did such a deep dive and it was very exciting. Yes. And I feel like we're not going to go as long on today's, but I feel like with the Menendez brothers, we're back there.
That's our roots. We really are like digging into these and what is the legal procedure here.
Yes.
You can find tons of commentary about these. Everyone has an opinion on Casey Anthony. Everyone has an opinion on the Menendez brothers. But I think in both of these, the sort of legal how it moved through the legal system, I guess, these cases makes it interesting.
They really do, and it's fun because we're coming full circle again because we talked about it when Casey Anthony they did that TV series, right, and brought her back. It was on Peacock, and I couldn't watch it, but you did.
I watched the whole thing, and it was awful.
So now we have a new drama documentary. It's
dramatized docuseries?
There we go. That's probably the best term for it. On the Menendez brothers on Netflix while we're doing this program. So it's a good way to circle back of, okay, these people are really in the news. They're on our TVs now in an entertainment fashion. So
and in the past week, we've had some updates, some real legal updates in the past week or so. So
huge legal updates.
Very big headlines right now.
Excellent. So what did you pour for yourself?
So I said on the last episode where I'm sticking with my boxed wine. Everyone has opinions about it. I love my Franzia boxed wine, but I went for my summer Sunset Blush boxed wine. We're back with chillable red. So this is my fall drink of choice. We're back with the red wine, and I'm excited.
That is a large pour. I like it. Kind of funny.
Look,
you're also at home tucked safely, right?
Oh, I'm not going anywhere. It's Halloween weekend. Come on.
Okay, good. We support responsible drinking.
Absolutely.
And
support your local Uber drivers. I mean,
for my mom's sake, we do not support alcoholism. Okay, just so everybody knows. Now, I am
drinking. Your dad's sake.
And for my dad's sake, since Dr. Vile is
well, you got to drink enough water for the both of us, Dr. Vile. This is how it works.
Fair enough.
My dad is also concerned. So, Dad, it's good. We represent responsible drinking if you drink at all.
And there is no such thing as responsible smoking, please.
No. Oh, goodness. Yeah, please. No, we're not supporting any smoking at all. That stuff kills you. I mean, and I have so many stories. We were recently talking with my son. He's 16 now, and we've been talking about life choices and the natural consequences of choices that you make. And one of them was about his grandmother who died of lung cancer because she'd smoked all of her life. And he's like, well, I just don't understand why she didn't stop. And it's always a question, right? The addiction is real, whatever it is, whether it's smoking or alcohol, or for me, it's probably sugar. Let's be honest. But there's that element, and each piece, if you have such a strong addiction, can kill you. But anyway, natural life consequences. My drink of choice today is I've got the label Menage a Trois Sweet Collection Moscato. So I am still going with the sweet white blend. I've got a little bit of my summer wines left over.
I love that one. That one is so good.
Outside. It is really good.
We also don't support responsible menage a trois.
Live your best life.
You thought you'd get by with the French. No way.
Okay, and this is, I'm trying not to laugh straight into the microphone. one of my favorite other things that happened with our first series, Chelsea, do you remember we had it wasn't this one, but it was another menage a trois rant. And out of my mouth comes, and today we're doing a menage a trois.
Deadpan. She says it's completely deadpan, looking at the camera. I said, oh, okay. Well, I mean, I'm down for anything.
So good times. Cheers, everybody, and let's tackle the Menendez brothers. All right, Chelsea is our true crime podcast aficionado. You
have an addiction to true crime.
Love them.
I really
this
do.
Is right up your alley. So talk to us about the Menendez brothers.
Okay, so I have heard a lot about them, just like anybody else. I think this is just one of those cases, you know, like the Casey Anthony. So I was like, let me go back to just the straight facts. What are we talking about? We're like predating me slightly. So we're going back to 1989. Good times. It's like the 80s. It's California. Super fun. Until there was a murder, right? So we have the murder of this couple, the Menendez parents. And for a while, they didn't think it was the brothers. It was about a month and a half of an investigation. Because these were a very, very wealthy family that had business connections. There was some illusion that it could have been a mob hit, that kind of thing.
Oh, interesting.
It was very brutal too, right?
Yeah, and it was
shotguns. Am I right?
Yeah, the father had 16 shots at close range with a shotgun, and the mother had 10 at pretty close range. Hers were not. It's kind of horrific. It looks like the dad, he was shot, and it was back to back, killed immediately in his seat. She was shot. They don't know exactly how many times, but she essentially crawled out of the room. It's horrifying,
came back
right?
For her, didn't they?
Well, they finished back? They finished her off because, shocker, the boys did it, the men did it, and they have admitted to it. And they essentially came in with the plan that one brother was going to take on the dad, the other brother was going to take on the mom. The brother who was supposed to shoot the mom kind of chickened out, and so she escaped slightly they were in like what they called their den, but it was like essentially a home movie theater. And like she escaped and kind of crawled down the hallway, and then it was killed at that point.
They shot her and then went out to the car, as I understand it, and then came back and finished her
because she wasn't
off.
dead.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, this is very morbid to say. If they would have just left her, she would have died. It wasn't like this was a glancing injury, right? But they did come in and essentially finish her off. So starting real grim and graphic. And there are lots of details that I'm just not going to get. I mean, it's horrifying. Like the actual crime is tough. And I'm not a gore person. I'm a true crime person because I like to know how these cases play out. I'm not a gore person. And these are tough. These are tough. They call it in and report it as if they have found their parents this way. And they really escape suspicion for a while. Until, here's the thing. If you kill two people and you are the beneficiaries of their life insurance policy and their entire estate, and you start blowing through $700,000 in the 80s, somebody do that time calculation math, can't be me. You might bring just a little bit of suspicion to yourself. Hey guys, not the plan.
Well, which is sort of like Casey Anthony went partying, her toddler's gone, and she's out partying in clubs. It's the same type of behavior that's raising alarms.
Because everyone's looking around going, and it wasn't like, again, this family was very, very wealthy. I keep saying boys, and there's a whole conversation about this because that's how they were referred to during their trial. These are adult men. They're the children, but these are adult men.
They were 18 and 21.
Yes. So technically adult men, right? And I keep saying boys because that's how they're referred to, but they were not boys. And I think that's an important clarification.
Dr. Vile, what do you have on that?
They were like 19, weren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
One was, they're 3 years apart. So I think it was 18 or 19, and then like 20, 21, depending on how the birthdays fell.
It's interesting. I sat in on some mock trial rounds or preparations the other night, and their case revolves in part around something known as the Slayer rule, which I think most people are not aware of. I was not, but I'm just looking.
You can't profit off of your crimes, right?
It's right. It's a legal principle that prevents a person from inheriting property from someone they murdered.
Nice, Chelsea.
So, and by the way,
the only thing I remembered for property law at all.
Well, it relates to an aphorism that Lincoln used to make about the person who pled mitigating circumstances because they were an orphan, but they were an orphan because they had killed their parents.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And so here's the thing. This is basically how they had started getting suspicion drawn to them because $700,000 now is a lot. Not to mention hop in the Wayback Machine, what that was in 1989.
Right.
And they went through that in like a month and a half. We're talking about Rolex, cars, and they already had this kind of access to not that much money, obviously. They had access to a very wealthy sort of lifestyle already. And so for it to even be more extravagant than the life they were already living, absolutely drew suspicion. Here's where the problem is. See, what happened was one of our brothers was seeing a psychologist and confessed, which this is such an interesting legally, right? Because
is it privileged?
And this is where things get real interesting and because there's multiple trials here, y'all. Plot twist. Here we go.
Right.
This is one of the things that a judge had to make a decision on, evidentiary decision, because not only did the psychologist, this is why I couldn't be a psychologist because it's what I would do. He recorded them. The kid starts confessing, is no danger to the public, nothing. So he takes him out and starts getting him talking again, and then has his mistress hide outside of the office door recording him, and then he reports it to the police.
Goodness.
I'm nosy because I'd be like, say that again. Can you say that? Can you say that a little louder? Right? Like we have cell phones now. It's much easier.
The psychiatrist participated with the police?
No, on his own. And then turns it over to
right. Which is it wasn't an entrapment issue. It was more did he violate privilege?
Yes, because the whole idea is very simply is that if someone's not a danger, like they're not going to commit a crime, they're not intending to commit a crime, you really shouldn't be able to break that confidentiality. He did. And then he doubled down and got him to confess, because he had confessed just in their normal sort of session. And then he got him to talk about it more and recorded it. To be fair, the police were already suspicious. But this really became an issue. And so there were lots of evidentiary hearings about this particular issue. So we get to trial number 1. And this is slightly overlapping with me. We're in 1993 I guess
we
a year
finally
before
got
me.
into your birth.
Well, not yet. Sorry. I'm 95. The second trial. I was here for the second trial. First one, not so much.
And the shepherd showed up. Is that? Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Wise men to follow.
The star in the east.
Exactly. And so the prosecutor thinks they have a pretty straightforward case. And it does seem that way, right? The whole idea is that you have these 2 spoiled rich kids who are getting cut out of the will for being spoiled rich kids. And they were mad at mommy and daddy. And so they wiped the hard drive and bought 2 shotguns. It seems like a very cut and dry case. And there's lots of evidence that supports that. They have found where the boys purchased the guns, when they purchased the guns, the conversations between the older brother and the younger brother. If that was it, if I was a prosecutor, I'd be like, I have a pretty good case.
Slam dunk, premeditated murder.
Yeah. There's no, this was planned. This was all of this.
Brutal.
I would think I had a pretty good case going in. This.
And you did, right? They got life.
Well,
second trial, right?
The second time.
Right.
And
the first one was a mistrial, correct?
The first one was a mistrial. And this is because one of the most interesting, to be fair, I do kind of have a girl crush on the defense attorney who represented them, because she was an incredible attorney. I think her crosses and directs were so well done.
Yeah.
And this is how they came out of the gate swinging about their defense. And this is where all the controversy comes in. This is why this case continues. This happened before I was born.
30 years later. Yeah.
I am almost 30 years old. And
it's 35 years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And still a big topic of conversation. And their defense is that, no, this was not a simple case of spoiled rich kids being spoiled rich kids and getting cut out of a will. It was a case of extreme torture and abuse starting in early childhood and continuing on. And essentially they snapped, right? That's sort of
the father is the claim, right? The father was sexually and otherwise abusing them.
Yes, they also claim the mother not only watched and was aware of, but knew about it and participated in some questionable behaviors with having the kids in the bed with her when at really inappropriate ages and touching them in ways that seem inappropriate and maybe in other contexts like, it's one of those things, it could go either way on the context, but in the context of this seems also physically, possibly sexually abusive. But it was really the dad who, I mean, horrific, graphic, torture. There's no other word
that's
for
the
it.
claim.
That's the claim.
Right.
This is the defense narrative.
And
this
it's
is the defense
somewhat now
narrative.
bolstered by someone else, in a boy band or whatever, who claims that he made a move on him.
So
Right.
yes,
but at the time, it was only the two boys who had any evidence or testimony toward it.
Right.
So it was their word.
There was kind of random pieces of circumstantial evidence that they could point to. I do think it's like interesting to point out here, and this is absolutely how this, as Dr. Battle pointed out, this is the defense narrative. This is the defense's story. They're not disclaiming that the boys killed their parents. Right. No one's ever debated that. Everyone's kind of like, duh, right? Like, you all did it. However, it's the question of why, and even if we accept the narrative, is that an excuse for premeditated homicide? Those are both sort of the questions we have at this point. The defense's narrative is that this was after, decades of horrific sexual torture, that they snapped and plotted to kill their parents because of this. And there's like these weird pieces of evidence, right? So we have a letter that, suggest abuse was going on. You have these cousins who would come to visit that are like, there's some weird stuff going on. But it's pretty, it's pretty circumstantial. And I think it's important to point out that like 2024 compared to 1994, the way we discuss sexual abuse is very different, especially sexual abuse with men. Absolutely. I think it's just a different conversation. And the defense attorney pointed it out. She asked the question that I think about in the way she did in her trial all the time is, would we be having a different conversation if we were talking about the Menendez sisters, right? Like, would this be a different trial? Which I think was such a profound moment, as a defense strategy. Now, there are plenty of people who don't believe them. Right. I am obviously, for people who think we're biased, yeah, I'm biased. I believe them. So I'm just going to throw that out there. I absolutely believe that these boys were abused.
And the family is split, right? The majority seem to be saying we think they've paid their penalty now.
Yes.
But some just still think they're making it, somebody murder would also make up a story.
Yeah. Yes. They have to have some defense. You're capable of shooting someone with a shotgun at point blank range 16 times, you can get on a stand and lie. Right. And you can get on the stand and lie. It's sort of the prosecutor, and we can get into this and have some feelings. Okay. So this is where we were in 94. Jury was split. This is sort of how it was framed. Again, the prosecutor was like, this is all BS. No one ever heard anything of it. You had this man who was 21 years old. If he'd been abused for 2 decades, he was not living in the house, right? Like at the time, like he'd been off to college.
Right. Why did he have to come back?
What imminent threat? What an imminent threat. The other boy was not a child. He was over, he was a legal adult. He could have left, right? And that's sort of the argument the prosecutor puts forward and just really is just dismissive, of this defense theory. That's where we are.
Theory, let's face it, this theory is the precursor to the battered wife syndrome.
Yes, right? We're slightly before our battered wife syndrome.
And that was Lorena Bobbitt. That was the first time that self-defense was put forward as a true defense and was accepted. So we're before this. So the question is, would they have actually been found not guilty, or would it have just lessened their sentence? So they went through the second trial in 1996. This was 7 years after the murders. And what happened in the second trial?
And essentially, we presented the same facts. It's really, there was not, we had a slight different sort of evidentiary rulings, but nothing that I think was all that important and inconclusive at the end between the first and the second trial of what evidence was allowed or disallowed. It's sort of just a different jury. And they were both convicted. They were both convicted of premeditated homicide, and there was an aggravating element added. I'm not sure exactly how it's phrased in California. And they have been in prison ever since.
They got life without parole.
Right? They got life without parole was the sentence.
Correct. Which is the important thing. That is the important thing. And they went all the way through all of the appeals, and they exhausted those. While I was still in middle and high school, this was a while ago. They exhausted those. And so we're like, okay, why is this relevant in 2024? Because y'all, we have breaking news. One, we have sort of the cultural zeitgeist has changed a lot. Yeah. We've had Gypsy Rose really get popular in the past year.
And who is Gypsy Rose? For those
I was going to say, is not the same, but is comparable. So Gypsy Rose is a convicted murderer, premeditated homicide
of her mother.
of her mother. And she also convinced a boy to take part in this with her. And she's out of prison, and she's been sort of an internet sensation over the past year. And the whole idea is that her mother had Munchausen by proxy. It's no longer called that, but that when she was diagnosed, that's what the diagnosis was. And basically medically tortured Gypsy for her whole life, lied about her birth date, had her teeth pulled, was giving her medication to give her seizures, a long list of horrific acts.
Ended up putting her in the hospital. Didn't she have a surgery or 3 that, her mom forced on her or something?
Yes. So she was basically being forced to live 7 years younger than she was. Her mother was giving her medication that induced seizures, and had all of her teeth pulled and was having her fed through a feeding tube. And part of the reason she was able to do this was they moved around a lot. And she used Hurricane Katrina to restart Gypsy at a lot younger, because they were like, all the medical records were destroyed. My daughter is actually 7 years younger than she was. And what else are the doctors going to do but believe you have a girl in a wheelchair who's unable to really communicate her own needs? What else do you do? Like, right? And she has been released. And I think that just the way we look at sort of these types of crimes culturally has changed a lot. Yeah. Obviously, we don't want people like planning premeditated homicide. So we don't want this to be a thing. But
what they're asking for, right, is not exoneration or even pardon, right? What they're suggesting is that the facts should be looked at to see if they're now eligible to be paroled, or have they served long enough to be a deterrent to similar actions by other people, I think, right?
Yes. So their original sentence excluded them from any consideration of parole at any time ever. They were sentenced to life without parole. Done. Throw away the key. It's over. However, we now have the prosecutor's office, which again is interesting. We've talked about this in a couple other cases of like
executions. Yeah.
Yes.
The recent
when you
execution.
have obviously not the same people, but the same office that initially prosecuted and, argued for these sentences, saying we are asking the court to reconsider. And so that's what's happened now, is that we've had the prosecutor's office ask the courts to reconsider the sentence and essentially change the sentence from life without the possibility of parole to life with the possibility of parole. So that would not get them out immediately. And I think that's an important point. And it doesn't even guarantee they'll get out ever. Right. It's just saying that their case will now go in front of the parole board to maybe be reconsidered, and these factors to be looked at in a different light than they were in the initial 2 trials and sentencing.
Right. So they have to get through, if it's going to happen, they still have 2 steps. So this has been submitted to a judge, but it has not yet been approved by the judge. So they have to get through a judge.
But they got to a hearing, which was important for them. Yeah.
Yes. And I think the important thing is the whole reason this happened is what you alluded to at the beginning, Virginia. It was public pressure. So there's 2 things that have happened in the past 3 years. The one that is the most recent is it's the docuseries called Monsters, and this season is the Menendez brothers. And I think I have feelings about how like true cases are portrayed. And there's a weird thing too, especially when we're not talking about cases that are 100 years ago. We're talking about like everybody's still alive. It gives me weird vibes, especially when it's not like you take creative liberties. I get it. Like that's how you produce media. But like when everyone is still here, it makes it a little weird, right? Like it makes it kind of crazy. But we also had a documentary from their perspective that was more sort of geared towards them, where they interviewed everybody. I had not seen that, but I did go watch in the past day or so. Oh, I have some feelings about this prosecutor, y'all. It's not nice. Really? I really want to be a girl's girl. I want to be a girl's girl. And I have to be clear, I watched the original trial. I have no problem with her behavior in the original trial. But to sit here in 2024 and to double down on what you said in really, I'm not easily offended. I say offensive things a lot. But when I was like clutching my pearls at the way she talked about these men and this abuse, she told him to get over it. Like this is recorded in the past 3 years. She's like, and I don't care if that. Crazy. I'm so sorry.
Okay, I've got to get this in.
Yes, please do.
The latest Matlock. Have you seen the second one?
I haven't yet, and I'm dying to.
Okay, so this week's Matlock deals with how attitudes change towards sexual harassment from when she allegedly started out in the law and when it is today. And so it actually makes a nice compliment to the kind of thing that, attitudes have changed on the matter.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it's important because I've watched the original trial and I know how I feel about it. Like I said, I had a girl crush on the defense attorney. I think she does an incredible job legally, but I also can have the, wherewithal to look back and say, just, it was a different time with different sort of cultural norms. I get it. And the prosecutor is like, these people planned and murdered, like, be so for real. I get it. I get where she's coming from, but I find it very frustrating to say, I have learned nothing in 30 years. Essentially, is a crazy twist to me. So I'm very hopeful. In my personal opinion, everyone's going to feel how they want about it.
Of course.
I believe this abuse happened. I believe what they testified to. And as we've talked about, there was someone who came out and said that the father had also sexually abused them as a child, someone who's so like unrelated to
random,
this
at
all. And I listened to the call between the attorney and the brothers, telling them, hey, we have someone who corroborates it. And their reaction to that was maybe one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever heard in my life, because the attorney is calling with like the morbid good news of like, hey, we can support your claim, which is like, okay, but yeah, that means that another child was sexually abused by my insane father. And that was sort of the brothers' reaction. They were like, is it worth it? Like, well, like, what is it? How am I supposed to ever feel good about this kind of news? Very heartbreaking call. So I'm hopeful.
This is real or this is recreated?
Oh, no, this is real. I listened to the real jail call between the attorney, because they weren't trying to talk about anything sort of that was privileged. It was just sort of a quick call. And so now here we are, right? Like, we are waiting to hear. I personally, like I said, my personal opinion is I believe what they testified to. I hope that I wish that would have been taken into consideration 30 years ago. Like, I struggle with this because by the definition of the law, they absolutely were guilty of first-degree premeditated homicide. That is the truth. But I also
it's
just
more
struggle
mitigation and sentencing versus guilt.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that is just what I struggle with this case. But I'm hopeful that maybe that they have a chance to, live the rest of their life outside of bars. And I don't think they're a danger to society, but there are a lot of, there are so many interesting social, legal issues here.
Is it aggravating circumstance if you initially give false testimony, or I guess it wasn't on the stand, but if you deny something and it's later proven, does that contribute? In some ways it is an aggravating factor, but I don't know. It's one you would expect any murderer to make,
Right. Generally, as far as elements of the crime, an aggravating factor would be something that makes it more heinous.
Right. Let's shotgun. It's your parents.
Right. It's two people.
They came back in and shot their knees to make it look like a mob hit after the bodies were dead. Right. Like, it was gross, y'all.
Yeah. So one of the murders I prosecuted in Newport News when I was a prosecutor there, it was aggravated and became capital murder because there were multiple victims at the same time. Right. It was a quadruple homicide. Right. There was also an aggravating factor of some of them were children, like a 6-year-old child. So these are the types of aggravating factors. Sometimes it'll be, that it's strangulation or laying in wait, that sort of thing. So for the elements to make it a higher crime with higher punishment possibilities, that's what we're looking for. But Dr. Weil, where I think you're headed is aggravation factors for sentencing. That it's something that can be considered to, within the realm. So if it's up to life without parole or less than that, then they can consider that to say, yeah, this is life without parole. Or they can say, okay, it's a factor, but it's not that large of a factor. We can do life with parole with the possibility. I think for me, I feel like
I've been talking for so long. Please, but I would love to hear what y'all think.
You're the true crime buff. It's only appropriate in this case. I struggle with it because, and I'm going to draw Casey Anthony in again. She also claimed abuse, right? She pinpointed her father. She's like, oh, my father must have taken her. My father abused me. And the poor life he has led since these allegations of abuse I personally don't think her statements were true. But what makes the Menendez brothers' statements more true or believable than hers, a lot of it is simple credibility, right? And this is what I ask my juries to do all the time, and it's hard. It's
a gut check.
Yes, you are the people who weigh the credibility of all of the witnesses and all of the evidence that's put before you. You can find some things more credible, you can find others less credible, but it's up to the jury. In a lot of my cases, especially my civil cases, I represent a lot of plaintiffs, not always, but mostly, and they get so offended. They're saying, but the defendant got up there and lied. He said, I was the one that caused the wreck, or I was the one that did that. And I said, what do you think he's going to do? He has to say something. He's most of them don't lie over and just say, yeah, you got me. They have to say something. And it's the reality of, well, they've got to come up with something. Now, I'm not saying it's always a false thing. Sometimes it's true. We have self-defense claims for a reason. We have reality of there's a reason I did this. Some are justifiable, some are not. But in this case, I'm like, well, yeah, they had to say something. And it's easy to throw the dead people under the bus, right? What are they going to say now? They can't refute it. So I don't know that I'm as convinced.
So it's not the main prosecutor, but there was someone else interviewed. And I think she had a good point, but the example she tried to give I thought was terrible. That was her point, is that you have to put on a defense. Like if you're going to go to trial and you're going to testify, which is the choice they made, you have to put on a defense. That's a good point. But the example that she gave was really bad, okay? Because she was like, I contacted the jail and they were with their attorney 3 to 4 hours at a time. That means they were practicing lying. And I was like,
no.
I've never even done a criminal defense trial. And do you know how many hours I spend chit-chatting on the phone, people? Let me tell you, 3 hours is nothing.
Clients are very needy, right? And for good reason, and especially criminal clients. Sometimes their life is at stake, but their freedom is at stake. And of course they want to talk to their attorney. Sometimes they just want to talk and talk and talk. And even
there's 14 weeks of defense testimony given. So she had a good point. They had to put on a defense. Maybe we should think about that. But saying they met with their attorney for 3 hours at a time, I cackled, actually cackled out loud, because I was like, I could not craft a coherent 14-week testimony in 3 hours. I could not do that. I could not convince a client to say that in 3 hours.
Yeah, I have a client right now who is proven innocent. Absolutely, 100% proof that he's innocent. And I have spent more time with this particular client than I've spent with many of my guilty clients. I mean, hours. And it's, he wants justice.
You don't ever have guilty clients, do you?
No. Don't you know everyone in jail isn't guilty?
No. Never.
I've had both. I've had truly innocent clients and truly guilty clients. And I've prosecuted, I hope, all guilty people. I've dismissed a lot of cases where I didn't think there was enough evidence to prove it, or that I really believed that they were innocent. But what's that one is better that 10 guilty men go free than 1 innocent man convicted. So, All right. So let's move on from the Menendez brothers and let's move to Elon Musk. Not because he's doing a crime, but because there is a criminal issue. So, Dr. Vile, I'm going to go to you. We are in the heat of the election. And tell us what is Elon Musk doing in the election and why?
Well, I think there's 2 different things. The one that's getting attention. So start with the one that isn't getting attention. I think he's paying people to register to vote or to recruit somebody to vote, like $100 or something like that. But the one that's very controversial is if you register. If you
are a registered voter.
Right. If you sign a petition, and it took me days to look it up, and it basically literally says the First and Second Amendments guarantee freedom of speech and the right to bear arms. By signing below, I'm pledging my support for the First and Second Amendment. Now,
and you have to be a registered voter. I believe that's the
Well,
requirement.
Right. To their name goes in the hat if you're a registered voter and you sign this, and then they draw sort of like a lottery, and the winners get $1 million. And
Per day. It's like each day
well,
they draw someone else.
each day a different winner.
Yeah.
And so there are laws against paying people to vote. And the question is, and maybe even I'm not sure about paying them to register, but the issue is, are you paying somebody basically for their vote? And in a sense, you're also paying them to register, because if they're not registered, they don't go into the lottery.
Right.
But what's odd about it, and so people have said, we got laws against this.
But
And
do we?
the Justice Department says this might be illegal.
And they sent him a letter saying
they sent him a letter saying this $1 million gift, prize might be illegal. But I think that, and again, I'm not the attorney, but if I were a defense attorney for him, I think I'd say, well, it might not be. You didn't tell me it was illegal. I mean, one of the fundamentals of law, right, is that it needs to be publicized. It needs to be clear, due process.
Right.
So I don't think they're going to get him on this. It's creative in a sense, it would be better if the state had a lottery that gave anybody who voted or registered, gave you a chance. And, we sort of have a reverse lottery, as lawyers know, which is in some jurisdictions, the people who serve on juries are selected or thought to be selected from voter registration rolls.
Correct.
So it discourages some people. They don't want to register because they don't want to serve on a jury.
Can't relate. I want to be on a jury so badly.
Chelsea's begging to be on one.
No, I think it's interesting, Dr. Buck, because I think you're right. And you've said this before, and the term is like when a law is created after you've already done something, they can't prosecute.
Ex post facto, yeah.
Thank you. There we go. You've talked about that before. I think he could. I don't think this is explicitly prohibited, but it's probably not a good idea. But I don't think it's explicitly prohibited.
Yeah, I mean,
well, and of course, if Trump is elected, I don't think he's going to have to worry about being prosecuted. And if Harris is elected, it didn't have any. I mean, it wouldn't have been determinative. But what's interesting here is this goes back to the Citizens United versus FEC. And other cases, well, even prior to that, even in the Buckley decision, you could give unlimited amounts to your own campaign
of money.
Now we basically have, you can, through PACs and other mechanisms. I mean, Musk has apparently spent $40+ million on a campaign,
right?
And he's a billionaire with multi-billion-dollar contracts with the government. But then another billionaire comes into play, right? Jeff Bezos,
yes,
owner of the Washington Post, who's apparently been generously spending his own money at a time when newspapers are not doing particularly well. And he announces this week that, despite the other editors wanting to take a position on who should be president, he's not going to do it. And of course, and I don't know his motives, but a lot of them are saying you're a coward. This is a problem with big government. Whether you favor, whatever policies you favor, the more things the government has to hand out, then the more things they can keep you from getting. And if you're a billionaire, you're looking out for your own interest. Right. Now, maybe there are other. Again, I don't know his, but that's the charge. That he's more concerned about, well, if Trump were elected and I had written an editorial against him, is it going to be bad for my businesses?
Right.
This is very scary. Now, also, you got another billionaire in there. I see Mark Cuban, who seems to be, as far as I can tell, sort of walking the straight and narrow in the sense of, here's who I support and why I support without going into questionable activities. But for those of us who think it's a government of we the people and that all men and women are created equal, we know, as a matter of fact, if you have millions of dollars to throw around, you're probably going to get better consideration than others do.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it's and particularly, I mean, in Musk's case, Trump has now, whether he'd be confirmed or not, but Trump has already promised that he's going to head up a commission for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It goes back to 1824, right?
I don't know. You
Where
tell us.
I believe
where
you.
John Quincy Adams, where Andrew Jackson charges that John Quincy
Yes.
Adams had promised Henry Clay that he would be Secretary of State if he would just support him. And I don't know that he did or didn't, but
Right.
if that was a corrupt bargain, where are we today? It seems almost
Yeah.
routine.
I think it's like a hard thing. I think because there's also this conversation that came out, and this is obviously not the same, but comparable of like when Taylor Swift made her statement about who she was supporting, obviously.
Well, and she was the next billionaire I was going to mention.
I was going to say she's a billionaire too, right?
Yes.
And I have a hard time with this because I'm like, well, if you have done the work to put yourself in a position of influence and power, should you not then be able to leverage that? Right? Like, I
and again, there might be difference. I mean, you could arguably make a distinction between endorsing someone and spending $40 million or better on the campaign.
Right.
Yes.
But I mean, yes, people are going to have disproportionate influence.
And I think it's goofy, silly if you are a regular person and you're letting any of these people tell you who to vote for. Go read a book. I need you to get it together because I love Taylor Swift. I listen to her music. I'm so happy to go to the Eras Tour. I don't care how she votes. I am not interested in her political takes. So if you are, maybe like reevaluate that. But also, I don't want, again, and maybe I'm biased. I don't want someone like Elon Musk just like essentially raffling off votes, right? Like, and that feels a little off to me, and maybe it's my bias, but I don't know.
Well, and I think that's the thing because it's only in some states, right? It's only in swing states. And,
yes.
And it feels like,
okay, guys, I'm going undercover since I'm in Georgia.
Look, don't you support the First and Second Amendments? I certainly do.
I do too.
Absolutely.
That's pretty innocuous, right? I mean,
yeehaw, baby.
That's right. I'll sign that petition.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it's going to end up in one of those games or lotteries rules versus a politics rule, because don't you have even like the McDonald's Monopoly game, you see at the bottom when they were running it, don't have to purchase to play.
Are we like back in the Pepsi versus like the contracts case? Are we back in the super jet case? Like, is this what we're doing?
Yeah, so I'm wondering if it's more the games and the lottery type of system that might end up investigating it and have more teeth to it. I'll be honest, I don't know those rules. That's not the type of law I do, nor the law I usually care about. But for the DOJ, I gotta say, if I were Elon Musk's attorney, which I would not love to do, but if I were, I think, Dr. Vial, I'm in agreement. I'd be like, well, I got a letter that says I might be in violation. Well, if you don't even know if I am, then how am I supposed to know if I am? I'm going to.
Imagine being stopped for speeding it, and
you say an arrest warrant that says you might be arrested.
I think you might have gone over the limit. Well, do you have it on radar? No, or do you know what the limit is here? No, we're not certain.
Okay, I'm going to drive off then. Yeah. All right. So let's hit our third topic and then end on, we're sort of in politics here, and I do want to circle back to some of the definitions. But let's pick up where we've been on the last few, where we've been talking about executions recently. We've had the one from Missouri, despite the prosecution's letter of begging them not to execute the man. The governor chose not to pardon him or relieve the execution, and the court did too. So he was executed. Oklahoma, we've got a reprieve. So that's two. We've got one decision different. Each of them are different. Now, Dr. Vial, where do we stand? What's this one concerning Shaken Baby?
Yeah, we're going to go to Texas. The guy's name is Robert Robertson. There's actually two sort of issues here. The first issue is he's convicting of killing a daughter under what's known as a shaken baby syndrome, which means that he shook her apparently enough to cause, there's a tripartite test, or there used to be, for if somebody's like, if they have blood in their eyes and there's two or three other things that in combination are taken to believe, or usually meant that this is probably what happened. It turns out, as I understand it, so that's the big issue. Now, the other issue is he has autism. And so the police well, there's two other things. One is the people who arrested him apparently did not know the medical history of the daughter. She had been in and out of the hospital. She was a small girl, like 40 times. And when they came and found her dead, the police officer thought the reaction of the father suggested indifference. Well, it turns out if you're autistic, you may or may not be able to express yourself in the same emotional frame that somebody else would.
Right.
And so a number of people here, including the person who originally arrested him, are saying well, back up a minute. As far as I can tell, no one has yet ever been given capital punishment, executed for shaken baby syndrome. And the medical consensus has since eroded that yes, these three symptoms would be symptoms, but they're not exclusive symptoms. They could also be symptoms of something else. And what happened, and this is one of the cagiest legal maneuvers that I've ever seen. My understanding is the governor, and Abbott is not particularly fond of letting people off from the death penalty. So governor refused it, others refused it, and so legislators called him to testify on a day after he was to be executed. And then a judge stepped in and said, well, we shouldn't be interfering with legislative. And then it gets even more interesting. So they call him and he says, well, they won't let him, the people in the prison won't let him go to the hearing. And he says, I'm autistic. I'm going to come across bad if we do it online. I'm really not familiar with that. And so to my knowledge, he has still not gotten his own chance to testify, but his execution is still on hold as that's being worked out. But it does seem odd, if we go to mitigating, and it's probably not exactly the same, but if you go to mitigating and aggravating factors,
yes,
if you're the first and only person ever to be executed for a particular crime, then that seems, if not cruel, at least unusual.
Yes.
Which is, the language of the Eighth Amendment as applied to the states through the 14th. And so it's a pretty fascinating case. And, the man, as maybe many do, protest his innocence. I don't think there was anybody there who can prove, can say that he actually did shake the baby until it died, that sort of thing. So it'll be a fascinating case to watch. And one wonders, my fear in this is you would think this is something that would be taken care of politically.
Right.
But politicians are often less concerned, maybe other people too, over immediate justice than they are they going to appear to be soft on crime or hard on crime?
Well, especially in an election year.
Yeah. And
I hope we just get to a point where being tough on crime isn't a value we hold personally. Like, I just think that is.
Well, we should be tough on crime. If a crime has been committed, people should, if one of your family members were killed or injured, you would want justice to be done.
Yes.
But
Absolutely.
being tough on crime doesn't mean putting people away who don't deserve to be away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the most fascinating part of this is the autism spectrum issue. Because Dr. Weil, you'll be able to speak much better to this, as memory is a vault of even these case names you pull out from nowhere, and even the years and who decided. It's crazy. So I have this vague recollection of my constitutional law classes, including yours, where we have the Supreme Court going through cases saying, okay, well, maybe we won't execute juveniles. Now we're not going to execute disabled people.
Or mentally challenged.
Exactly, or mentally challenged. So where does that leave us? If we're looking at those cases, are we headed in the direction where the autism spectrum might be considered as the mentally disabled?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'd hate to be predicting the Supreme Court right now.
Right.
But, I mean, it's a very similar issue for certain. If emotionally, if you have someone, and I don't know enough here, and I don't want to make a generalization, but if emotionally he's closer to a juvenile than to an adult, and this would partly go, would he or would he not recognize the seriousness of shaking a baby? I just don't know.
Right.
But it's certainly fascinating.
Yeah, I think we're getting into what I would say is we've gotten into physical disabilities, we've gotten into age, we've gotten into mental disabilities, and now we're getting into the emotional disabilities. And where's the court going to go with that? And I would like to see that come up through the courts in another case where a new defendant is saying, I'm on the autism spectrum, some kind of consideration should be given to me. Not necessarily either because it makes me the less guilty mind, right? Yeah. Or it should alleviate my sentence lessen my sentence.
I think about this a little bit in what we've talked about before of the idea that in the federal sentencing guidelines, right? The idea of admission of guilt is an important thing. So if someone truly is innocent, and however, if they are truly innocent and they're convicted, to get a lesser sentence, it would be important for them to then take accountability, to confess, right? To do all of these things. However, in this case, and I have personal experience and I've worked a lot with this community, and my brother is on the spectrum as well, is that tends to be a lot of black and white thinking. And generally, if they, again, you have someone who's truly innocent that was convicted, they're not going to do that. They are just not generally, I'm speaking very generally, that is one of the things that tends to classify this type of diagnosis. And so, I mean, the system's already kind of set up against that, right? If you have some sort of mental faculties that you're just not going to, it's difficult for you to see things other than black and white, even though it might be advantageous for you to go ahead and just, take some ownership. Despite the truth of the matter. I don't know. I think that this is an interesting question, and I don't know how we do it, especially when our diagnostic tools, it's not the same as a blood test, right? We're not doing brain scans and we can say, oh, this brain has this. These are the exact manifestations of that, right? Versus something like, diabetes or something like that.
Yeah. And you don't want to give a general sort of get out of jail free card to any a disability. I mean, that's
no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. A battle of the experts. All right. So let's close this out with a little bit of politics. So if you don't want to hear that, you can turn it off. But we'd like to do, since we are in election season, we're, a week and a half away from elections when we're taping this, 2 weeks at most when we're taping this show. And I think it's important to go over some fundamentals. So, Dr. Vial, I know one of the biggest words we're hearing, and especially for political theory, political thought, political science, we hear, especially in this election, the words fascist, right? We hear dictators, fascism, Nazism. We hear all of these.
Threat to democracy. Come on.
Right. But what do we actually mean? So what I want to do is start with a very fundamental part of our country, because a lot of people say, oh, we're a democracy. Well, we are, but I believe the best term is actually a democratic republic. Is that correct?
I'm actually giving a lecture on this in about 2 or 3 weeks.
Perfect.
Getting a sneak peek to the lecture? A teaser trailer right here.
In a sense, I think that's inadequate. We're a democratic republic. I mean, Republican part of it, small r, means we have representative democracy instead of direct democracy. But we're also, maybe more importantly, or as importantly, we're a constitutional democracy. So we have chosen to bind ourselves in advance against violating certain protections. So we're going to grant people freedom of religion, even if we believe they're going to hell for it. Mm-hmm. We're going to allow people to speak, even if it's against our most cherished values. so forth. And, we're not going to do unreasonable searches and seizures, even in the most heinous of cases. So the term fashion, where this sort of came into play. Now, what's fascinating is, what is it? Speaker Johnson and someone else have sort of gotten on Harris's case for using the term against Trump.
Right.
I have seen some clips that suggest, well, with Trump actually claiming, and these are not terms these are generally considered opposite, that Harris is a communist, a socialist, and a fascist. And anything
She's
else
just really
that people think
overachieving,
of.
honestly.
Pardon?
Because I didn't know. I said she's an overachiever because I didn't know you could be all three until now. So I didn't know that was available.
Okay, I guess you could look at it that way. But what happened is, during the Harris interview, the CNN interview that she participated in and that Trump did not, she didn't actually use the term until she was asked. So Anderson Cooper said,
do you
John
think he's
Kelly and other people who have worked closely to Trump have either called him a fascist or said that he has fascist tendency. Do you agree? And she said, yes, I do.
Right.
So she wasn't actually, now I think she has since maybe used the term, but they both used it. But historically, fascism had a a fairly specific, albeit a little bit nebulous notion. It's most generally associated with Hitler and Mussolini. And I would say there are three or four main things. One is extreme nationalism, which, particularly in Hitler's case, often resulted in the only true people, the only true Teutons, what are Germans called? Anyway, the only true Teutonic race.
The pure German race.
The only true
Austrian
Germans
race,
are those of, this ancestry. That doesn't include Jews. It doesn't include Gypsies, Roma. It doesn't include others. So extreme nationalism often connected to racism. And it is interesting that, in this last couple of days, Trump has said that the United States has become a garbage can. I would ask your listeners to look up the inscription on the Statue of Liberty, which says, "Give me your refuse, give me your puddled poor, breathing to be free." But in any case, strong emphasis on the nation, strong emphasis on the state, and militarism, strong emphasis on the military, often in an aggressive fashion. And probably the key to fascism often has less to do with ideology than it does with a particular person. De Fuhrer, El Deuce. There is one person who is thought to embody the nation, and basically you wipe out any obstacles to his rule because he knows what's best. He's the daddy, if you will.
Right.
To use a description that Tucker Carlson has used.
Okay, Tucker Carlson, turn up.
Yeah.
He's coming home to spank us, apparently, according to Tucker Carlson.
That is one of the most bizarre descriptions I have ever heard of an American leader.
I have no filter, and that clip was insane. I've never been a news broadcaster, and those things would have come out of my mouth. And I have never been more uncomfortable by a clip in my life. That was an insane comparison by him.
So let's differentiate, Dr. Weil. Now that we know a little bit about fascism, what I'd love to do is compare it to Nazism. Is Nazism a pure form of it? Is it a difference? And then we've got Stalin, who had communism.
The two most likely candidates for fascist governments would be Germany, World War II Germany, and Italy. Mussolini was sort of carrying on, he was more influenced by Hitler than the other way around. So, they're the two again, purity of the race, living room for the race, for the expansion of the race, glorification of the state, symbols all designed to emphasize individual subordination and glorification of the ruler. And what is interesting is the people who have made the original charge here comes not from Kamala Harris.
Right.
It comes from John Kelly and people who Trump had chosen to work with him. Some of them, by the way, many of them ex-military.
I was going to say mostly military.
Right. Who say, he seems to ignore the rule of law. He seems to, he seems to be concerned about sort of ultranationalism, et cetera, et cetera. So, I personally think if I had been Harris, and it's easy to second guess, right? She's in an hour interview and
without a time to think about it.
I think if I had been asked that, I would have said, it's really not for me to judge, but certainly people around him have characterized him as such and have said that he has certain tendencies. I mean, part of what happened with Hitler is he was able basically, we hear this continual talk of the guardrails, and I don't know how strong. I mean, we did, we had 4 years of a Trump presidency, and we didn't end up with a dictatorship. Presumably, we wouldn't again. But the fear is among some people is that you did have people like Kelly and others who seemed committed to something other than the person that they were serving. Yes, they were trying to serve Trump, but they thought that the country was more important. And so the question is, would he now surround himself simply? I mean, it'd be a question for any leader. Right. Are you just going to have yes men and women around you? And of course, this was, part of the problem with the Trump administration was how many people he had in his own family. And in this campaign, you have a daughter-in-law whose kid now the Republican National Committee. Yeah. And so, it's certainly a concern.
So let's finish with the definitions on communism. So we had,
right.
We've been having, it's like, well, a lot of people would say, well, let's lump them all together because it was World War II.
No. I mean,
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying in general, especially the younger generations, because in the younger generations, I don't think they had as much with paring down the specific powers, who they were allied with, what their ideals were. But Nazism and fascism is completely opposite. I mean, they hate communists. So what is the difference? But, in America, then we had the Red Scare, right? Where we were accusing people of being communists. So what's so bad about a communist?
Well,
if anything.
Basically, socialists believe in that the government should own the major means of production. So the major industries they believe should be government run because they think it should go to the profit of everyone, not just the profit of a few individuals.
Like the Department of Education, right? Like that's a good example of like a socialist program that we have. That's the Department of Education. Sure. Is that it's it's managed by the government and it benefits sort of the entire populace.
Well, sort of, but it's not a revenue generating.
Right, of course.
It's not a coal company or a railroad or a news media or something like that. So communists believe that socialism should be brought about through force if necessary. In other words, the lower classes who are being exploited should rise up in revolution. They should, destroy the capitalists. Once you get rid of capitalism, then we're going to have sort of a utopian world. But what connects them, why I think we often use the two together, is they're both authoritarian. They both believe strong power. Well, communism, ironically, believes that the state would eventually wither away. But in the interim, the only way to get rid of the capitalists is through use of force. So both of them say and historically, communism, Leninism was very important. Lenin, we're going to have this coterie of leaders, and they're going to lead the proletariat in this revolt. So we're going to give them pretty much unlimited power. So both of them are authoritarian. They don't want guardrails. They want to be able to shut you up. if you say something they don't believe. In the case of communism, communism was often it originally at least was atheistic. So if you got people out there practicing their religion, you ought to get rid of them because they're just fools. Why are they doing that? So we tend to use it, and that's why in a single speech, Trump can accuse somebody of being both a communist and a fascist, because basically they're words that have very negative denotations and connotations.
Right.
And most of us, we fought in a sense. Well, we fought against both, right?
Yes.
In World War II, we fought primarily. We were allied with a communist nation in order to strike down what we thought was a larger threat from
Fascist,
Nazism.
yeah.
But in Korea, we fought against communists because we thought, they were the central threat there. And
As
through
well as
most
the
of
Cold War.
Yeah, the most of the Cold War was, the free nations of the world as opposed to those that had, basically dictatorships. And one of the fascinating things is historically, now there are two different views. Historically, America was viewed as a city on a hill.
Right.
We were going to be basically meant we were going to be examples to others. And Abraham Lincoln would say, we're the last best hope of mankind. And sometimes we've been content with we're going to set the example and people are going to see it and they're going to be drawn to democracy because they see that. But at other times we've taken a more militant, we're going to make the world safe for democracy, right? World War I.
Right.
We're going to, if we need to have a dictator to support communism, then we'll support the dictator. And Trump does seem, more than any other contemporary president, he seems to admire people who are authoritarian.
Right.
He seemed to, he wrote love letters, so-called, to the head of North Korea. He seemed to have a pretty close relationship with Putin.
Right.
Erdogan in Eastern Europe. He seems very close to him. And so the reason that you might suggest that he has fascist tendency is he doesn't seem to be as aligned with other democracies. And in fact, the strongest democracies in the world outside of our own and maybe Canada are probably those in Western Europe.
Right.
In NATO.
Yeah, he's not cozying up to King Charles. He's
right. I mean, he seems,
he's
basically concerned that he doesn't think they're paying their freight. They're paying more. No, we're paying more for their defense than they are, and you can certainly make an argument, maybe as to whether they're doing enough or not.
Of course,
but traditionally, Germany and France and Holland and England, these United Kingdom, these have been those that we've associated with,
at least since World War II.
Yes. Yeah. Well, in World
at
War
least for
I as well.
Germany, though, you included Germany, which has become more of a Western power.
Right.
So, all right. So those are some definitions for you. We appreciate your listening. Please like and subscribe. Boop those buttons. Let us know that you're liking us. Go ahead and put those comments. I guess no comment is horrible, but please be considerate.
No, if you're going to be mean, tag me. I'll
just
chit chat.
Be careful what you get back. But no, we try to be as respectful as possible. We don't like crude words. We don't like curse words. We encourage you, please don't use those. But we do like opposite thoughts. We like the First Amendment, right? Bring on that form. We are for freedom of speech.
Big First Amendment gal over here. We love to chit chat.
Yeah, so freedom of speech, but do be polite as possible. Okay, that's all we ask. So we enjoyed the show. I loved this show. I think this was a lot of fun. I'm excited and wary about the upcoming election in many ways. I won't go into it, but I am. Dr. Vile, I think you're sort of there too, is your intellectual interests and everything you've worked your whole career for is happening on the scene, but I don't know that makes you happy.
No.
Yeah. And Chelsea's here. She's our
look, okay, here's the thing, y'all.
Little
here's
Spitfire.
The thing. I am actually, here's the thing. Last election, I had just moved to DC. The day all of my family leaves, January 6th happened. This is my first night alone in DC. And I was 1.7 miles from the Capitol. I just moved to DC. So now I'm back in Georgia, which, is a pretty battleground state at the moment.
Huge
I don't
swing
want
state.
any more excitement. I'm not built for it. I just cannot do it.
Yeah, and I'm up here in Maryland, very, very close to DC, going, I'm not so sure what's going to happen up here, and I'm gonna hunker down, no matter what. But prayers.
No matter what happens, we're gonna cross your fingers, pray, do a rain dance, do a spell, whatever your vibe is. That we have the peaceful transfer of power, no matter what that means, is what I'm personally going to hope for.
Yeah, prayers for peace. We don't condone any violence of any kind, and hopefully this can be peaceful and more intellectually interesting than anything else. But go vote. Make your vote count, because it does. Go vote. As political scientists, we will always encourage that. Entertain yourself with the law, entertain yourself with the issues, find out the issues, figure them out, decide for yourself, make those decisions, and put them into action and to motion. And we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.